Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're really digging into nuclear power, specifically looking at how it might be key for economic sustainability.
Yeah, it's a big topic, lots of angles.
Exactly. And, listeners want the core info, the main arguments, without getting totally swamped. So we've got this source, nuclear power and economic sustainability. And our mission today, basically, is to pull out the key ideas from this source on how nuclear could support stable economies, job creation, energy security, all that good stuff.
Sort of cutting through the noise to get to the economic argument itself, we're looking at why this source sees it as so important for, well, long-term economic health.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The central claim in this paper, it seems to be that nuclear power kind of hits a sweet spot. It's reliable, it's cost-effective, right? Eventually, and it's relatively clean.
Right, that combination is what they're really pushing as the driver for economic sustainability.
Yeah, clean energy, big scale.
Yeah.
It can feel a bit vague sometimes, but this document tries to ground it.
It does. I mean, first off, the scale is already huge, right? It's the second biggest source of low-carbon electricity in the world. Only hydropower beats it.
Wow, second biggest. That's significant already.
Definitely. It means there's a massive existing infrastructure doing this work.
And on the clean part, to put some numbers on it, this source says nuclear is responsible for about, 2.5% of the world's CO2 emissions?
Yeah, around that figure, which when you think about how much power that represents, it's a pretty low carbon footprint compared to, the alternatives like fossil fuels.
It really puts it in perspective. Makes you think about its potential, doesn't it?
It does. And it kind of highlights that, look, no energy is perfect, zero impact, but nuclear generates a lot of power for its carbon output.
Okay, so economic sustainability. The sustain part implies long-term, right?
Right.
And that connects to the lifespan of these plants. That bit caught my eye.
Oh, absolutely. The source talks about an average operational life of about 40 years.
40 years.
40 years? I mean, think about that stability. Nearly half a century of steady power from one big build.
That's incredible predictability for planning, isn't it? Compared to things you might have to, constantly rebuild or update.
Exactly. It's not like replacing major stuff every 10 years. It's built for the long haul.
Okay, but let's talk cost. Because building one isn't cheap. The source mentions $6 billion to $10 billion. That's a huge upfront number.
It is. No denying it's a massive capital investment, but the source argues you have to look at it over that 40-year lifespan.
Right.
And then you factor in the annual running costs, which they put around $2 billion a year. So the idea is, yes, big initial hit, but then decades of more predictable operating costs. It's a long game.
So that sticker shock is real. But the argument is long-term consistency, predictable costs. That's where the economic sustainability argument really lies.
Precisely.
And stable energy prices. That must be a massive relief for businesses, for consumers not having those wild swings you get with, say, oil and gas.
Absolutely. Predictability in energy costs lets businesses plan, budget, invest. It removes a huge chunk of volatility. That fosters a much more stable economic environment overall.
Okay, makes sense. But there's always the question, the concern about nuclear waste. It comes up every time.
And the source addresses it head on. It argues that the waste can be managed safely, primarily through disposal in deep geological repositories.
Deep geological repositories.
Okay. The key point they make is that this method is designed to minimize both the environmental risk and, crucially, the long-term economic impact. So it acknowledges the challenge but offers a specific long-term containment solution.
Right, locking it away safely so it's not a problem, environmentally or financially down the line.
Okay.
But let's zoom out for a second. What about the history here? Nuclear power wasn't always around.
No, it's relatively new, historically speaking. The basic science, early 20th century, but the source points out the real push for commercial use came after World War II.
Ah, okay.
You had the first plant, Soviet Union 54, then the U.S. in 57. That really kicked things off.
And from there to now, it's grown quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. Over 440 plants, 32 countries generating something like 10% of the world's electricity. That's a fair chunk of global power.
10%. Wow. So how does that global presence connect back to this economic sustainability idea?
Well, the source links it directly to providing dependable baseload power. That's the constant, reliable electricity the grid needs 247.
Baseload. Right, the foundation.
Exactly. It's the power that's always on, underpinning everything else.
Yeah.
Unlike, say, solar or wind, which obviously depend on the weather, nuclear provides that steady foundation. That's vital for a stable economy.
That makes a lot of sense. That reliability, running 2047, rain or shine. That seems like a huge economic plus. We kind of take electricity for granted,
Yeah.
but that constant supply is fundamental for, well, everything. Industry growth.
Totally. Think about factories, data centers, hospitals. They need uninterrupted power. Nuclear delivers that consistency, reducing the risk of outages, cutting the need for costly backups. That reliability directly supports economic activity.
And then there's the whole energy independence angle. Less reliance on imported fuel. That sounds like a good thing for national stability.
It really is. Having a strong domestic nuclear sector means a country is less vulnerable to, global price shocks or political instability affecting fuel supplies. It boosts energy security, which is definitely part of economic security.
Okay, and we can't really talk economic sustainability today without talking climate change, right?
Yeah.
The costs are just mounting: extreme weather, health impacts from pollution.
A critical point. And because nuclear power itself, during operation, produces almost no greenhouse gases, the source argues it directly helps reduce those long-term economic burdens of climate change.
So cleaner energy means lower climate costs down the road.
Essentially, yes, lessening climate impacts means avoiding massive future expenses. The source uses the U.S. as an example. Nuclear provides about 20% of U.S. electricity.
Right.
That only accounts for maybe 2% of the greenhouse gas emissions from generating electricity.
20% of the power for 2% of the emissions. That's quite a ratio. It shows you can balance energy needs and environmental responsibility, which feeds back into the economy.
It's a pretty stark illustration of getting a lot of energy with a very small carbon footprint. Yeah. Underscores its potential role.
But we have to be realistic. There are challenges, serious ones. The source mentions accidents like Chernobyl, Fukushima. Public perception is shaped by those.
Absolutely. And the source stresses that stringent safety measures, really robust regulation, are non-negotiable. They're essential.
They're investments, really.
Exactly. Investments in safety, in public trust, which are crucial for the whole thing to be economically viable and publicly acceptable in the long run. You can't separate safety from the economics here.
And the other big challenge, waste management, which we touched on. Deep geological repositories are the main solution presented.
Yes, and the source implies this isn't a static thing. There's ongoing research, technology improvements, international cooperation, all aimed at making long-term storage even safer and more efficient.
Trying to minimize those future environmental and economic liabilities.
Right. Managing the back-end costs effectively.
Okay, so if we kind of pull all these threads together,
Yeah.
the argument from the source seems to be, yes, big upfront cost, yes, serious safety and waste concerns that must be managed, but overall, nuclear offers a strong path to long-term economic sustainability.
That's pretty much the picture it paints. A foundation for a stable energy future, reliable, low-carbon power supporting growth, creating skilled jobs, reducing climate costs, boosting energy security.
So the main takeaway here isn't just about electricity generation. It's positioning nuclear as potentially a fundamental piece of building a resilient, sustainable economy for the future.
Exactly. It's presented as a strategic choice, balancing energy needs, environmental goals, and economic stability.
Which leads us nicely to a final thought for everyone listening. As we all try to figure out this whole sustainable development puzzle, what role should these huge long-term projects, like nuclear power, play? How do we best balance those immediate economic needs with our long-term environmental responsibilities?
Definitely something to think about. There aren't easy answers there.
No, there aren't. Something to chew on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.